And a very good morning to you. We're live in London. You're with Monocle on Sunday with me, Emma Nelson. Coming up today, my guests share their views on the week's biggest stories. I have Alex von Tunzelmann and Charles Hecker next to me. Alex, good morning. What have you spotted?
Good morning. Well, I mean, a lot of quite interesting news stories today. I'm very interested in Russia's Intervision Song Contest that was held this weekend, an alternative to Eurovision from Vladimir Putin.
How about you, Charles?
Carrying on the Russian theme, we're going to look into the safety of the skies over Estonia and what happens when Russian jets stray into somebody else's backyard.
And we'll get the latest from Helsinki.
Finnish teenagers' dance habits have changed. Sweden bans mobile phones in schools. And a woman in Norway finds animals from the Ice Age in a cave. I'm Monocle's Helsinki correspondent Petri Burtsoff, and I'll be talking about what's in the news in the Nordics.
Plus, we'll hear from our editorial director, Tyler Brûlé, who's enjoying a final dip of the season in the lake. It's the 21st of September, 2025. Live from London, this is Monocle on Sunday.
Live from London, this is Monocle on Sunday with Emma Nelson.
We have a happy, busy programme ahead of us, ladies and gentlemen. Alex von Tunzelmann, historian, author and screenwriter, and Charles Hecker, author, Russia analyst and the author of Zero Sum, The Arc of International Business in Russia. Welcome. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good
How
morning.
are we this morning?
Quite chirpy, I think. We seem
Doing
Super
okay
chirpy.
for an early Sunday morning. Not bad in the slightest.
And what are we doing this week, or what have we been doing? What's been happening in the Tunzelmann Hecker world?
Well, I'm off this week to Gdansk in Poland, just for a little trip, really, just to see it. Although I really feel that I've timed it quite poorly vis-a-vis Russian incursions into airspace.
Or well, depending on what you fancy. How about you, Charles?
We'll be talking about that in just a second, I think.
We will.
This was a sort of bookish week for me. I am working on a second book proposal, but certainly couldn't tell you anything about it too far in
You've
advance.
just said it on the radio.
But I'm not telling you what it's about.
Okay, so we have fresh, crisp starts for the autumn. Something that our editorial director Tyler Brûlé has been talking about in his column this morning. Tyler, a very good morning to you. Joining us, I know exactly where you are. You're by the lake.
I am by the lake. Good morning, everybody. It is absolutely gorgeous here. This is really sort of, of course, it's an end of season. It's the start of a new season moment. But this is the day that many of the public bathing clubs, not just in and around Lake Zurich, but elsewhere in Switzerland, officially close for the season. That means, lifeguards move off to become ski instructors or go elsewhere in the world. And so there is this just sort of wonderful sense of, that last bottle of rosé, the last enormous plate of pasta, and lots of sunny dips, and the weather so far is holding. It's probably about already 22 degrees.
So have you just basically told us what you're going to be doing today? You're going to be soaking up the last.
Pretty much, Emma. Yeah, there's going to be a little walk in the forest right now. Actually, I just see the first bather sort of tentatively going in the water. She's in a kind of a granny pant. Anyway,
nothing wrong with the granny pant, Tyler. Nothing wrong with the granny
pant. For bathing anyway, but never mind. Listen, it's the last day of the season, so yes, people are. It is all well underway. I'm going to go for a long forest walk and then park myself. I've got last week's weekend FT, this week's weekend FT to catch up on. So I'm looking forward to of course that as well.
Now you talk about forest walks in your column this week.
I do, yes. I was visiting one of those very fine clinics in Switzerland, in the Suisse Romand part of the country. Very, very, very famous clinic, and we were paying a visit to the CEO, looking at the collaborations, etc. And it was quite interesting. The CEO, he was talking about what they do, and of course they've got this exceptional hospital, and you can go and have a baby there, and you can have heart surgery, and so it's not just a world of what he said. He goes, everybody else who do this, they're in the soup and forest business. And I was like, I had to pause. Soup and forest. He goes, I go soup and forest. He said, you can tell he's Italian. Soup and forest. He said, that's what these places are selling. Everyone else in the world of wellness, you're drinking broth, and then they're sending you sort of up a hill for a hike.
And this is effectively something that you're perfectly capable of doing yourself this afternoon.
Well, in part, but I've got to say I do fall for soup and forest once or twice a year with a bit of an invoice attached to the back of it. But anyway, it was interesting. It did make me also think as well about leadership. We met with a lot of heads of luxury brands today, and over the course of the week, I should say. And it's just interesting because we're exposed to so many people. When you turn on CNBC and when you watch CNN, or you happen to sort of maybe catch a live stream of someone's quarterly results, and it's just the world of. It's the same delivery. Thank God we've moved on from the black turtleneck, maybe just because it's the summer season. But of course, so much has been sort of, certainly when you deliver results and the language and the metabolism of quarterly results and the company's reports, there's a certain language. It's been adopted from the US and it's gone global. And it was just good meeting solid Swiss CEOs who tell it like it is. We're talking about how they're going to be, of course, dealing with these 39% tariffs that they have in this country as well. You may or may not be surprised, but of course, they're not really concerned about the Christmas season. Of course, that's the most important season for watches and jewelry, certainly in the Northern Hemisphere. And it's like, oh, no. We went and shipped, we sort of forward shipped all of Christmas back in June, just in case it was going to go wrong. So listen, if you're going to go into any watch boutique or any shop in the U.S., that stuff was already there in place. So you're not going to get smacked with tariffs. At least probably not until the new year. But of course, a lot of thought and consideration. But anyway, I liked meeting CEOs with swagger, who certainly had a good story to tell, and are proper characters that they represent their brand properly. And maybe this is because they're not running a semiconductor company. I don't know.
And the trouble that you find, I think you hit the nail on the head with this, is when you become there is that certain seam of CEOs, isn't there, who are actually more on the defensive side. They feel as if they have to protect their brand rather than actually tell their stories. And it makes a huge difference, doesn't it, when someone can actually sit down and tell you something that's actually relevant to the outside world rather than the shareholders.
Absolutely. And you would know this because you were also, as your side gig, you were working with corporates and training corporate leaders, Emma, and you're absolutely right. So a lot of it is, of course, the defensive mechanism, et cetera. But for sure, when you speak to someone and they can tell you in detail about why a certain store works in a mall in Toronto, and why a certain mall in South Florida does not work, and who are the people who are also coming from around the world to Miami to actually purchase watches, and that sort of gives you an idea immediately. It's a snapshot of course, what are the economies that are developing in Latin America, or the ones that have sort of reinstated their position in the world as well. And that's it's just wonderful. And where someone's not being sort of protective of the language around it. It's not any great state secret. And that was I felt very refreshed. So as much as we have a perky Studio One in London this morning, I sort of got back to Zurich Wednesday evening, feeling sort of very alive, very ready for this last quarter of the year. And
good stuff's happening in Zurich. We have another Monocle suite, and yesterday we had the Herbstmarkt.
We had the Herbstmarkt. Actually, on Thursday we had Bräuninger, and this is interesting. I think just trip up to Gdansk, of course, coming up. Of course, it was amazing speaking to the leadership of one of Germany's, I would say, sort of more interesting retail groups right now. Bräuninger is a big department store group. I mean, they like to call themselves, of course, a multi-channel brand, et cetera. I don't think that their customers necessarily think that they're going to a multi-channel, omni-channel retail experience. They see themselves going to a department store. It doesn't matter. Germany's been through a very, very tough patch of late with many bankruptcies, et cetera. Bräuninger is actually buying up a lot of stores which have been empty, derelict in city centers. They're positioned maybe in a Selfridges, slightly below Neiman Marcus, above a David Jones, depending where you're listening to this program in the world. So it is a premium department store play. You're not going to go buy a new bed there. They're focused obviously on sport and beauty and fashion, all of these things. But it's just amazing to listen to Germans talk about Poland and really how they look east now, and they are really licking their lips at this market and saying, wow, things may not be great at home, but we cannot wait. And I'm not quoting him, but I would not be surprised if there are going to be stores, in Warsaw, Gdansk, Wrocław, and elsewhere soon.
I'm going to take you off into a different direction, if I may, Tyler. And we're going to talk about an article later on today in Le Figaro about how American tourists are stockpiling on medicines when they go to France.
Well, why wouldn't they?
Well,
because
exactly.
they've got a French pharmacy to go to where not everything's locked up like if you go into a Walgreens in the States and everything is behind plexiglass. Of course, they're stocking up.
I was in
Sorry.
I was in an Austrian supermarket last week, and there was an American in front of me who had a holdall full of deodorant, and they said it was because they were stocking up because in America it's $12 a pop, and they could just basically check in the next 3 years of stuff. And it got me thinking. I have next to me, in order to ward off a cold, I have a packet of French respiratory capsules, which are basically made of thyme and mint oil. Goodness knows what it's going to do to my insides in a little while. But there's that delight of when you're somewhere where you haven't been before or somewhere interesting and new, and you go into a shop and you start to stockpile things. Is there anything that you always sort of fall upon when you go into a shop somewhere?
Well, I was at a French pharmacy last week, and we've got plenty of deodorant in Switzerland as well, but I like the French brand Horace, and yeah, there it was, and I thought, oh my goodness, what happens if there's a complete collapse of the global logistics system, and I can't order anymore. And I'm not a big online shopper anyway, but there I was. But I think one of the amazing things about the French pharmacy versus, let's say, the U.S. pharmacy is you do not have these major corporations going for this sort of payola, buying shelf space in the stores. And that's why I always think you feel like everything is owned by Gillette when you're in the U.S. And fine, you can find a Gillette owned shaving cream or deodorant in France, but you're going to find all kinds of other brands as well. And so I think it's just this bounty of choice that you get in a French pharmacy, which is such a delight.
It's absolutely amazing, and we do love an international supermarket as well. Okay, Tyler, we can actually hear the lake behind you, so it would be absolutely pure cruelty of me to make you dwell on the radio any further. Have a lovely day down by the Kusenbadi. Do your dips and drink your rosé and do your forest walk, and we shall speak to you very soon. That was our editorial director Tyler Brûlé on the line from Switzerland. Okay, I've got the capsule respiratoire. Charles and we've all had a look at them, ladies and gentlemen, and they all look like tiny little capsules of oil, don't they? And they're in theory they're going to sort me out.
Do you swallow them or do you break them and then rub them on your...
you swallow them, which is why I'm quite interested as to what happens when you take peppermint, don't know the name of that one, thyme and lavender. I've just swallowed lavender oil, ladies and gentlemen. I'll be asleep in 45 minutes. Let's hope we make it to the end of the programme. When you go abroad, what do you generally sort of fall upon?
Well, so first of all, we have to say that most pharmacies overseas compared to UK pharmacies are brighter, cleaner, smarter, have a better selection, have a wider selection, and are cheaper. And as you pointed out, or as Tyler pointed out, things aren't under lock and key, and you don't have to press a button to have somebody come and liberate your deodorant from captivity. I'm in this sort of strange position because sometimes I've got to do my sort of foreign stocking up back in the U.S.
Okay.
And since we're on the topic of deodorant, the only country in the world that sells a brand that I am incredibly loyal to is the United States of America. It must contain some sort of substance that's banned everywhere else. So I stock up in deodorant when I go back to my native land. Everywhere else, I'll grab literally whatever I can lay my hands on. And I make sure that I've always got at least a few years' supply of paracetamol, and I've also...
You can get that in the United Kingdom, and it's reasonably priced, Charles. Just to let you know.
About 37p for a packet.
The other thing that I can't live without is valerian root, which is something I discovered when I was living in Russia, and that is that basically everybody who lives in Russia is constantly popping valerian pills. It is completely natural and herbal, and it's sort of it kind of helps reduce your blood pressure, not in the medical sense, but it's a sort of, it calms you down. And if you take enough of it before you go to sleep, boom, you're out.
Out we go. Okay, so that Charles is bringing back strange deodorant and valerian root, which again you can buy in the United Kingdom reasonably priced. Other roots are available. What goes in Alex von Tunzelmann's holdall? What do you pack the extra holdall full to stuff full of when you're checking in?
So I love foreign pharmacies. I mean, it's sort of my idea of complete bliss to be released into one for an hour. And I used to love the American ones. I mean, it was so thrilling when you went to the States and there were all these different things. And I have to completely agree with Tyler that the sort of locking up of them in the US has been, I think it's also been a complete retail disaster. It's really contributed to the fact that people don't now shop in physical shops and order online because it's such a bore to not be able to sort of pick things up and see if you're allergic to one of the ingredients or sort of compare them or all this sort of thing. I mean, and you don't want to call over a staff member. It just sort of, then you feel like you're sort of, got to rush because obviously somebody's standing there with a key. So, I mean, it's become, I think they've completely ruined that experience, which is very sad because US pharmacies were always brilliant. I mean, I still do stock up on, because you cannot get over the counter in the EU or the UK, the special diphenhydramine sleeping pills, which in the US you can buy a massive great tub of, no restrictions at all, and various other things. And I also particularly like they have some wonderful earplugs in US pharmacies, which I have a latex allergy, and most of the ones you can buy in the UK are latex, complete disaster. The Americans, of course, cater for allergies, and so these are really most effective ones you will ever get.
We all get absolutely. I get totally seduced by the packaging, and the international element of the packaging. And I think let's go back to the French pharmacist. The more clinical, the more it looks like it's made by a stern man called Philippe somewhere in a lab west of Paris. I'm going for that, and we're all supposed to be going for more natural, more sort of like holistic, more soup and forest. And there I am going, that looks as if it's massively means business, and we do get seduced by this, don't we?
Well, I think we want to be convinced that whatever it is that we're sort of swallowing is actually going to be good for us. And you're absolutely right. There's something about packaging, particularly, I was going to say, that the king of sort of convincing packaging and sort of clinical look and feel are German pharmacies, which feel sort of like mini hospital dispensaries. And also, if I'm not mistaken, I think that the people who work there also wear white coats.
Yes.
Which also, sort of projects authority and makes you feel quite confident that whatever they tell you to do in a language that you don't understand.
Not many jokes in German pharmacy.
Not too many jokes in German pharmacy, but I've also walked out of there with armfuls of boxes of things that look like they're very effective at curing whatever ails you at the moment.
You see, I have to say, I'm less into the German ones because they won't let you browse, because you've got the person with the white coat sort of scowling at you and asking what you need, and you're like, no, I just want to be allowed to look at things actually for a little bit. Whereas the French ones, you can browse at your great leisure, and indeed I do, and then come out with these armfuls of Marseille soap and all sorts of things that I bring home, and capsules of various kinds.
Capsules. I just worked out, I think it's clove that I've taken. So I've got peppermint, clove, thyme and lavender.
It looks like something you could open up and put into your, cook with or put into your tea.
Yes, we'll find out. We'll see if just keep tuning if something funny happens to me. Charles and this is like a live drug experiment.
Alex, we're going to have to take over the microphone.
Oh, good grief. Oh, no.
Okay, while I still have some element of control, tell us what's happening in the news. I think we need to talk immediately about what's happened in Estonia over on Friday. It absolutely threw everybody, didn't it? When the fact that Russia, I wonder whether having met Donald Trump in Alaska, Vladimir Putin got the measure of Trump and then has just decided to go for broke. Well,
if the idea of Putin and Trump meeting in Anchorage was to encourage Russia to come to the table for peace negotiations, the exact opposite has happened, and that is that the bombing of Ukraine, including the targeting of civilians and the targeting most intensely of the capital, Kyiv, has intensified since Anchorage. Two other things have happened since Anchorage, and this is what's in the headlines pretty much across the papers today and over the past 2 weeks, and that is that, first of all, 2 weeks ago you had an incursion of a couple of dozen Russian drones into Polish airspace, some of which the Polish Air Force shot down. and safely. In most cases, I think there was some civilian damage, because when you blow something out of the sky, to prevent it from doing greater damage, of course, the pieces do cause a bit of damage when they land. But most importantly, on Friday, just a couple of days ago, you had the incursion of Russian MiG-31 jets into Estonian airspace, and they sort of lingered in an unwelcome fashion for about 12 minutes. And that doesn't seem like very much time, but when you're a MiG-31 jet with missiles attached under the wings, then, you are a most unwelcome visitor. And so what's happened is that, Estonia has turned to NATO saying, what are we going to do when this happens again? And the question has been posed that, well, maybe the next time this happens, we should shoot the jets down. And so you wonder what that looks like and what happens and what the escalation procedure is, and then what the fallout is and the response from Russia. And that's what's being discussed this afternoon in several papers around Europe.
It makes you wonder what that limit is. Because if 5-6 years ago we had said Russian MiGs are flying into Estonian airspace, you would have thought that something utterly catastrophic had happened. But this is just something that they came in. Those 12 minutes were long 12 minutes, but they went away again. They were escorted.
Well, what it looks like at the moment is a kind of testing, isn't it? I mean, it's Putin having a go and seeing how quickly will NATO respond. How will they respond? What will happen? What sort of political and military response will there be? And of course, that isn't reassuring at all. I mean, that's quite the opposite, I feel. My first reaction to this story was to think, well, look, it would be completely insane to open another front. He's already really bogged down in Ukraine. And then I thought, well, I was one of those people, I fear, in this very studio a few days before he invading Ukraine, saying, well, that would be very illogical and what a ridiculous thing to do. So, of course, he won't do it. So, perhaps logic is not really the point here. And this is about a kind of political survival.
Estonia lives in the shadow of being part of the Soviet Union, doesn't it? When you talk to people, they are very, very aware of their very recent history. And I remember being in Tallinn a couple of years ago and being in a hotel that was full of German pilots. And I said, what are you doing? And they said, we're flying. We do patrols all the time over the Gulf of Finland. And this idea that Estonia will be taken by surprise by this is not perhaps necessarily true, because they live next door and have been very aware of what the neighbour can do for a very long time.
That's right. The Baltic states are acutely aware of their relationship with their neighbor. And the three Baltic republics are all former Soviet republics. And so they have been, frankly, in the vanguard of sort of European defense strategy, saying, why don't you listen to what we have to say about all of this, because we think we know a little bit more than what people in Western Europe know about this. There is some precedent to this. Before the start of the war in Ukraine, before the full-scale invasion, you would periodically have Russian submarines invading Baltic waters. You would have Russian jets flying. For example, there were incursions into Swedish airspace. And in 2015, if I'm not mistaken, Turkey shot down a Russian jet that had strayed into Turkish airspace after a mission in Syria. And that's the most proximal example we have of what happens when jets engage. And Turkey is also a NATO member, so this was a NATO-Russian confrontation. Things were ugly for a while between Turkey and Russia. They both de-escalated, and now things are, back to their sort of usual bumpy self. But we'll see what happens, and it is very, very much a sensitive issue for the Baltics, and they couldn't be happier to be NATO members.
Let's bring in Petri Burtsoff, Monocle's Helsinki correspondent. Good morning, Petri.
Good morning, Emma.
We are going to join you, we're checking in with you a little bit earlier because you'll be telling us all about the Nordic news in a little while. But it's probably a good idea to bring you in at this point, because given the fact that I take it you are in Finland, you're in Helsinki, just across the water from Estonia. And Finland, as a new NATO member, is going to be looking at this very closely. And I imagine that this is all that people are talking about.
Yeah, you're correct. It's the number one news story here, and let's remember that these kinds of violations, both on the Finnish border and on the Estonian border, these are commonplace. I believe this is the fifth one in Estonia this year. But as you have discussed in the studio, this was unprecedented just in its sort of scale and length. So first of all, 12 minutes in Estonian airspace. Usually these incursions are sort of a few seconds, and Russia always explains that these incursions by saying that, look, the air corridor on the Gulf of Finland between Estonia and Finland is very narrow, and it's, that's where the international planes are supposed to fly, that, these kinds of mistakes happen. And then, if it's a couple of seconds, everybody knows that's not true, but it's still, authorities just let them pass. But then 12 minutes, and this this time the planes were really close to Tallinn, actually, this island of Naissaari, which is just off the coast of Tallinn. Coincidentally, you take the ferry from Helsinki to Tallinn, which I do pretty much every month, and it goes by this island, which is just really a stone's throw from the Estonian capital, Tallinn, and that's how close to Tallinn these fighter jets were this time. So it's quite different this time, and Estonian officials, I believe it was their main sort of security official who said that this is the most severe incident to happen in Estonia since Estonia joined NATO in 2004. So very, very major news story.
When the news broke, it would have been quite late on Friday evening for you, wasn't it? What was the reaction straight away?
Well, the reaction's been relatively, it's a main news story, as I said, but it's still, I have to remember that these kinds of events take place all the time. Airspace violations, GPS jamming, they've been going on, cyber attacks, they've been going on for years, if not decades. So they don't have the same shock value that they used to have, and that maybe then when you look at all these events sort of from London or Western Europe, you would think that it's a bigger shock reaction, but it hasn't been. And funny thing is, it actually coincided with the Helsinki Security Forum, which is the biggest sort of a security event or a meeting to take place in Finland. It took place on Friday. We had the former U.S. Army Chief David Petraeus in Helsinki, and a lot of other high-ranking NATO officials as well. So they had a chance to comment, and it was this quite a legendary comment from the Ukrainian ambassador to Finland, who basically just urged NATO to do something about it, because otherwise we just look like we're scared of Russia. So quite harsh rhetoric from all sides, really.
Chuck, let's bring you in, because you were nodding when we were talking about the rhetoric. This is, and also the fact that, dare I say it, this has taken the focus away from Ukraine.
Yes, that's right, and it's interesting that domestically in Estonia there was quite a lot of pressure on the Estonian foreign minister to pull the trigger, quite literally. And so one of the reasons why Estonia has called for NATO consultations is to try to rule out some of the gray area that exists in the decision-making process about when and how and why to shoot down a hostile presence in the skies. And so, yes, this is an international incident. It has also become a very serious Estonian domestic political incident.
If you were Mark Rutte, let's stay with you, Charles. If you were Mark Rutte, what would you be doing right now? NATO Secretary General, thinking, okay, this is happening a lot. We've had Poland, we've had who can't remember whether the other is it Slovenia or Slovakia. There's been an incursion as well, and now we have Estonia. We have 3 in 3 weeks now.
Yeah. So, Russia has for a very long time positioned the war on Ukraine as a battle between East and West. And once NATO nations began, shortly after the full-scale invasion began, once NATO nations started supplying Ukraine with weaponry, that sort of gave a certain amount of legitimacy to Putin's narrative of why this war is taking place. I mean, if you're Mark Rutte, presumably you want to come across as tough. But the West has been extremely reluctant to engage in any activity that looks like escalation. Putin has always had the upper hand in terms of the use of aggression, and he's managed to sort of get away with this for a very long time. The one thing that we know is that the East and West are now at least answering each other's phone calls. When generals ring each other, they're now picking up the phone. And there was a time immediately after the outbreak of the war, or the full-scale invasion, that wasn't happening. And so I suppose if you're Mark Rutte, you want to come across as a little bit tougher, but also beef up your de-escalation methodology so that in case things get ugly, you've got a hotline to take the temperature down.
And coming back to you, Petri, other country that the incursion was Romania. Petri, if Finland has this really tricky situation now, doesn't it? Because there was that agreement and that decision to go and be part and join NATO, which clearly is something that the Finns had to think a very, very long time about. But the fact now remains that if you are part of NATO and there are incursions by the Russians into your neighbour's airspace, that you may, as a Finnish Air Force, may be called upon to take part.
Absolutely, that's the case. And in fact, it was the Finnish fighter jets who were the first ones to be scrambled when these MiGs entered Estonian airspace. So that's just part of the reality now, I guess. And it just sort of Finns accept that that's the way it is. And I mean, I have to say that even if Finland was outside of NATO and there was a violation of Estonian airspace like that, Finland would, if not scramble its jets, Finland would still help Estonia because of our sort of shared history and vicinity, but obviously not under legal obligations like what it is under NATO. But yeah, it's part of the. It was part of the trade-off, and it was part of the public debate before Finland joined NATO that, it comes with, we get to go under the security umbrella of NATO, but we also have our responsibilities that, our soldiers then also need to defend not only Finland, but NATO. And it was, in striking numbers, something like over 90% of Finns, supported joining of NATO. So I would say there is a consensus that yes, Finland has to help, but Finns have accepted it.
Petri, let's stay with you for the other news from where you are. What's happening in Petri Burtsoff world today?
Well, first of all, I have to tell you, I mean, kind of a big gear shift going from talking about possible Third World War, but I'm actually at our summer house, and it's the.
I knew this was coming.
Yes, I'm looking out the window, and I'm actually looking at the Gulf of Finland here, so I can see Estonia almost from my window. But it's the harvest season, and we just came to one of the final days of late summer in Finland, just harvesting everything that is left and cooking everything from what we find in the forest. I made a lovely mushroom pasta last night, so I'm having a good time. But then of course reading this very, very, very serious news. But all the other news items that I had for this news roundup were actually quite. Well, very, very different far removed from the geopolitics of this world. But Emma, do you want to start with Finnish teenagers' dance habits?
Yes, obviously. I mean, but also when it all kicks off, we're all going round to Petri's because he's stockpiled everything. So we'll be all right in Petri's summer house. You're going apple picking later, is that correct?
That's correct. Yes, I'm making apple pies.
Excellent.
So everybody's welcome.
I'm going apple picking as well. So we're sort of subconsciously preparing for Armageddon. Okay, talk to me about Finnish teenagers.
Okay. Yes. So there's a new study that's been carried out, and apparently Finnish teenagers are more passive dancers and more sort of careful and shy dancers than before. And there's this well-known dance teacher and DJ Sofia Wekesa, who's interviewed in Helsingin Sanomat, Finland's main daily, who basically says that she's quite worried about young Finns losing their ability to dance, really. And she says that she claims that part of the reason is the social media, that because everybody has cell phones and people are just filming all the time when they're at clubs. So people, especially young men or boys, are ashamed of really busting out their best and craziest and wildest dance moves like we used to when we were young, Emma. And because, they're worried that then they're going to be ridiculed on TikTok or whatever teenagers are on these days. But and then this is funny. The dance teacher says that that because they basically the teenage boys are dancing as if they were recording a TikTok video, so it's very two-dimensional and not three-dimensional like young people used to dance to decades ago. So this is a very worrying trend. Like, if young people can't dance anymore, where is this world going to?
No, it's absolutely terrible. Well, I'm wondering whether the dance teacher would sort of try to drum up a bit more business, but that would be a little bit cynical of me to suggest so. Let's bring you in onto this, Alex, because you sort of talk quite a lot about the use of sort of AI and online stuff. The fact of, I don't know how many teenage boys we've all seen dancing in the last few months, but it would be quite sad were boys to be able to stop, were prevented from doing what they need to do on the dance floor.
I think it's very sad this is inhibiting, and I'm actually even more worried about this because we've heard this week about the launch coming in a couple of weeks of the new Meta glasses, the sort of smart glasses that you wear on your face that film people. I think there's huge privacy concerns around this. The idea that someone can just be in a room with you and filming you and potentially, post that footage somewhere and all of this. And I'm really worried that this will intimidate people more. So I think we're going to need some regulation very fast on these glasses. I'm hoping that lots of clubs will say you're not coming in. I think some concert venues have already said you're not going to be able to come in with these. And I hope with teenage boys, maybe they should make them, really luminous pink or green or something so you can really see if somebody's wearing them. Some sort of legislation, because I am worried that I think that we start actually inhibiting our behaviour and our joy if we're very scared that all the time we might be humiliated by ending up online.
The only reassuring thing about these glasses is that apparently on their big introduction, when Zuckerberg got on the stage and introduced them, they glitched. And they didn't work. And there he was standing in front of the world sort of tech community introducing this new product. And it failed on a couple of occasions. And so, but I'm in complete agreement with Alex here, and that is that I think that this is an enormous invasion of can I say privacy rather than privacy. And also in foreign drugstores, I buy vitamins rather than vitamins. But although, I recently learned that anybody who is in public can be photographed without their consent. And that photograph can be used towards any purpose. And so the genre of street photography is perhaps a slightly more analog version of this invasion of privacy that we've grown accustomed to. But I think that there's something about the surreptitious nature of you're just wearing a pair of glasses. And so if you look at someone, which you do thousands of times a day, they're not aware that you're actually taking their picture.
It's interesting that when you do filming in public, you do get lots of people coming up to you saying you're not allowed to film me, and you say, well, actually, because we are in a public place, then yes, we can. And Petri, do you find, when you're talking to sort of like younger Finns, that they find themselves growing up in a more constricted world?
Well, Emma, I have to be honest with you. Young people, for me, mean the 2 and 4 year old boys that I have. So they're still, 10 years from the dancing world. And I haven't really chatted with the 2 or 3 teenagers that I know about their dance moves. So I'm not going to lie that I'm an expert on Finnish teenagers dancing. But can I just say that, this, how scary is this idea that if everybody's going to wear these Meta glasses, that, you go to a club or any public space and you have, let's say 100 people wearing the exact same pair of glasses. I think that's a dystopia, only in terms of sort of like looks and fashion sense.
It's absolutely, it's terrible. But let's talk about another story that has a slight connection to it, which is the Swedes have decided to implement a national mobile phone ban in schools. How far along the line this says about Sweden, I'm not entirely sure. It is something that's becoming increasingly popular around the world. One wonders in a country like Sweden why it might have taken them so long.
Yes, exactly. So nationwide mobile phone ban in schools. We have similar bans in place in Finland as well, and I believe Denmark and other European countries. But this is quite strict because usually the bans are left. The supervision is left to the schools, and it's sort of a school specific. I believe it's a recommendation, but this is actually a nationwide, like a legal ban of you're not allowed to have mobile phones in schools. I don't know how they're going to supervise that, if they're going to have a mobile phone police standing in the schools. But obviously there's just reading this piece of news in the Swedish press. There's all sorts of studies that prove how it improves concentration, reduces distraction, and creates a better learning environment when you don't have the mobile phones, and just improves academic performance really, and also classroom climate. But then they cite these funny examples here of how teenagers they're really clever, even though if they can't dance, they're very clever. They've started making these mock-up phones that you can just, they collect the phones when you arrive at school, and then teenagers are just handing in these mock-up phones that they can keep their real phone. So this is going to be interesting to see how they manage to supervise all of this.
There's a look of shock on Charles Hacker's face, and there's a look of sort of knowing acceptance on Alex's face. Alex, you're just like, yeah, this is what children do.
Yeah, dummy phones. I mean, I'm afraid this is an absolute. Everybody's doing this. I mean, and it's a real worry actually, increasingly around things like exam grades, because of course, with people using AI all the time to kind of write their essays, we're kind of seeing a shift away from the sort of coursework-based kind of marking that we've had a shift towards in the last couple of decades, back towards the idea that actually what we need is invigilated exams. But how do you stop them getting a mobile phone in? Because even if you collect them at the door, what if they just stick in some burner phone that you can buy for 10 quid on a stall, and they've actually still got one up their sleeve? So it's proving quite tricky.
This is astonishing to me. I mean, this is from the world of sort of sanctions workarounds. Whether it's on a state actor or a non-state actor or a high school student.
I mean, they're the most devious. Just to be clear.
Well, I was going to use the word resilience, but I suppose it's a little bit of both, and it's ingenious, and I'm a little bit shocked at how willingly people will break the rules, because Petri's right, and that is that the evidence is unanimously convincing that by taking mobile phones out of the classroom, student performance improves. And so when you see this direct correlation, it just sounds like such a no-brainer. I'm flabbergasted at the creativity. Maybe this tells us a little bit about today's youth and their resilience and their creativity, but it's a bit of a shocker to me.
Oh, Charles, you are so innocent. How lovely. What else have you found in your world, Petri?
Okay, so I have one really grim story and one uplifting story. Which one would you prefer? Uplifting or grim?
Well, I'll ask the guests. Alex or Charles, do we want uplifting or grim?
I mean, I think, don't we want to be uplifted? Isn't there enough grim in the world?
I vote for uplifting.
Okay, happy news, please, Petri.
Yes, happy news, science-related happy news, let's put it that way. A woman in northern Norway has found the remains of 46 different Ice Age animals inside a cave. These remains include, it says here, more than just reindeer, which, of course you find in northern Norway. Whales, seals, polar bear, birds, and fish were also found, it says here. And this is the biggest find so far, biggest discovery so far of remnants of Ice Age animals in one place, at least in the Nordic context, it says here. So very happy news for science, and somewhat interestingly, I mean, we think about Ice Age. Well, I guess a layperson thinks of Ice Age of being an age where there was a lot of ice, but actually the animals inside this cave, they prove that there was also a sea where they could swim and get sustenance nearby, and also that the temperatures were not that cold. So this is an interesting find indeed, and I thought this was such an uplifting news story, and I just want to meet that woman who wanders into a cave and finds 46 different Ice Age animals there.
She found bones sticking out of the walls.
Yeah, something like that. Exactly. A lot of these remains are also very small, almost microscopic. I mean, she obviously, when she wandered in there, she didn't see, 46 different animals. But then when the science community arrived, then they realized that, wow, this is quite a discovery.
Petri Burtsoff in his summer house in Finland, just about to forage for. What are you foraging for? Oh, you're doing apple picking today, aren't you, Petri? That's it. We wish you a very, very lovely Sunday. That was Petri Burtsoff, Monocle's Helsinki correspondent. Right, you're listening to Monocle on Sunday, by the way, if you didn't know. Alex von Tunzelmann and Charles Hacker are sitting around the desk with me with the latest stories. Alex, what was it that you wanted to talk about today? What did you bring in?
Well, I brought in which has just happened last night, Russia's Intervision Song Contest. So, we know that Russia has been kicked out of the Eurovision Song Contest. Now, during the Soviet era, this also happened, and Russia had its own Intervision Song Contest. So this isn't a brand new innovation. But what has happened, I mean, that sort of it petered out. It went again in the 70s for a bit and this sort of thing. But I mean, basically, Putin has revived it this year, and it had a sort of, should we say, rather interesting list of invitees. Certainly not just from Europe, from all around the world. We had, Cuba and Vietnam. And Vietnam won. No spoilers. This has already happened last night. And a sort of gathering. But I find this it's a very interesting moment. I have to say, almost tempted to watch it, apart from being very aware that this is quite clearly a piece of Putinist propaganda.
Chuck, have you been following the story of Intervision over the decades?
Intermittently, let's put it that way. But Alex is right. I mean, this is the revival of Russia's antidote or answer to Eurovision. It is also part of the Putinish story that Russia is pushing back against European values. I mean, the idea of resurrecting Intervision was sort of given additional impetus after the victory of Conchita Wurst of Austria in Eurovision, because Russia just would have no truck with, a cross-dressing bearded performer, artist winning the European Song Contest. The sort of elephant in the room here, though, when it comes to Russia and Intervision and Eurovision, is that Russia loves Eurovision. Okay, they pretend that they hate it. The politicians hate it. Everybody else loves it. Russia's won it. Russia's hosted it. Russians watch it and devour it, not just from their television sets in Moscow and Russia, but also in expat locations around the world. And most Russians are deeply disappointed that Russia's no longer participating in Eurovision, and Intervision will never substitute for the real thing in their minds.
Why not? Does it take itself a little bit too seriously?
Well, it's the kookiness of Eurovision. I mean, frankly, it's the kitsch is sort of coming out of Eurovision as it becomes an incredibly sort of overproduced and just sort of hyper serious music contest. But I think Russian pop music traditions have always been closer to the fare that you get in Eurovision than the things that you're seeing and hearing in Intervision, and sort of songs from, I say this without casting any aspersions in the slightest, but sort of songs from Vietnam and the global South are never really going to compete with the production values of Swedish pop. And Russian pop music tradition has always been much closer to that than what you see on Intervision.
I mean, I'm sure that the competitors from the likes of Uzbekistan would probably try and differ with you, but it's a good soft power element, isn't it? Because Eurovision is that moment when there is so much silliness and love and abandonment of usual work that everybody starts to enjoy the political toing and froing within Eurovision as somewhat as a sort of slightly ridiculous thing. But to have Russia be able to sort of push its Intervision and push it to the global South and welcome, congratulate the Vietnamese for doing so well, it will do good for them, at least.
I mean, that's certainly the idea. And I think we're also at a bit of a crisis point for Eurovision itself. There's already been a movement this year. It's always been controversial that Israel, for instance, has been included. But it's particularly controversial, obviously, right now. We've just had that UN special report declaring that what's happening in Gaza is a genocide. And three big Eurovision nations, Ireland, Spain and the Netherlands, who are really three of the sort of mainstays, have said that they won't appear this year if Israel does. And now it seems like the organisers of Eurovision are sort of basically trying to hide under the sofa and pretend this isn't really happening and sort of put the decision off, because obviously it's going to be incredibly politically awkward whatever happens. But we are seeing, I think in Britain we sort of see Eurovision as a bit of a sort of footnote and a silly joke. It's very popular among lots of people, but it's obviously like, you can sort of see successive pretty weak British entries and all of this, whereas other countries clearly put far more effort into what they do. But I think on this side you see actually there is a really serious political side to this kind of seemingly fluffy, sparkly event, that actually there is a serious political thing going on. And I mean, I think you have to see the Intervision in the context of, just a few weeks ago, Putin in Beijing, and this kind of summit there with Xi Jinping, with these other leaders, with Narendra Modi. And then you have China and India in Moscow. This is creating something.
it sort of neatly moves into the idea of when you use entertainment and it suddenly takes on a much more political bent. I think we have to talk about Jimmy Kimmel. And the fact is that you have a dissenting voice, or even just a voice, not just being taken off air or being told off, but being taken off air and the programme suspended, and also the huge reaction, both from Democrats and Republicans alike, about what this actually means for light-hearted events, or indeed, being a comedian in America nowadays.
This is the first time in my life, and it may be the only time in my life, that I find myself agreeing with Ted Cruz.
Yes, it's strange, isn't it?
Yeah, his politics periodically makes for strange bedfellows, and this is one of those moments, because he has compared the sort of the threats against Kimmel and his show and Disney and ABC. He's compared them to sort of mafia tactics of sort of like, nice car you got there, shame if something were to happen to it. And you wonder, part of the reason that you do this, if you are, for example, an aspiring autocrat, is you do this so that you inflict self-censorship on everyone else. And I guess that's sort of what it means now if you are a high-profile television personality or a comedian. Look, the sign of a healthy democracy is a robust political satire sort of scene. And when one diminishes, so does the other. And so what the Trump administration has done is it has, indirectly but fairly loudly cracked down on Kimmel. At the end of the day, it was Disney that pulled the plug, but under a very, very thinly, not even a veiled threat. It was an overt threat when the head of the FCC says we can do this the easy way or we can do this the hard way. The hard way would have meant the retraction of ABC's broadcast license, which is the nuclear option, sort of DEFCON 5. And some artists double down on their criticism of the Trump administration in their own humorous way, and others, it has to be said, sort of retreated a little bit into the shadows.
And there's an excellent article in the New York Times today which actually draws a direct comparison between what's happening in the United States and excuse me, I'm going to sneeze. The capsule respiratoires are not working. Sorry about that.
Take those out of your French pharmacy bag. Yeah.
Just going back to what I was saying before we were rudely interrupted by my nose. There is this drawing of a comparison back again to Russia of the fact that when you have sort of self-limiting censorship, and they're sort of talking quite a lot about Jimmy Fallon, who is actually not, who's sort of like stepping a little bit back from making any great criticism about Donald Trump, because obviously would you in this day and age, and it takes everything back to 2003 about a spate of Russian artists introducing American musicals into their country and describing them themselves as Kremlin stars because they knew which side their bread was buttered on.
Well, this is something that I think is kind of really fascinating to watch. If I may briefly give a book recommendation that I have no personal stake in. I've just been reading a brand new book by the Israeli journalist Ayala Penievsky, which is called The New Censorship. And this is exactly what she's arguing, is that, we sort of imagine censorship as blacked out portions in documents, but actually, and she traces this to Netanyahu in Israel, but she also talks about it with Trump, Orban, with Nigel Farage in the UK, is actually this different sort of censorship where it becomes, where really it's more about what Steve Bannon called flooding the zone with, I won't say the word, but he said a rude word is what you flood the zone with. And it's about this sort of right-wing push constantly against journalists to change the language, to moderate themselves, so they would put it, to kind of self-censor, to limit themselves. And so this censorship comes up as a sort of a terrified response to a very, very coordinated campaign on the right. And what we've seen happen with Jimmy Kimmel really is an incredibly overt version of that, where it's just been made clear. And this is, of course, from the Republican and right wing in the US that for years has been complaining about cancel culture and saying, comedians can't make jokes anymore. No one can say anything in this country. And then, what are they doing? It's the most blatant hypocrisy. And I think you can see actually some, to be fair, some Republicans and some on the right, you mentioned Ted Cruz, have actually said, hold on a minute, this is really not what we've been arguing for.
One thing that's come out in the last 12 hours is that when in a much more serious context, the Pentagon has told journalists that they cannot disclose unauthorised information, otherwise they'll risk losing access to the building. Now, when you have a government that says that anything that is unauthorised cannot be reported, where does that leave us, Chuck?
Well, it robs the profession of journalism of one of its most important elements, and that is, holding power to account and exposing hidden truths. The Pentagon is really, in fairly rapid succession, cracking down on journalists. I mean, we know that most of the journalists that had desks inside the Pentagon, strictly as a courtesy on behalf of the I was about to say the Department of Defense, but I suppose we're now supposed to call it the Department of War. These sort of courtesy desks that they had inside the Pentagon so that they could report and then file from, a sort of well-lit, presumably air-conditioned room. Those have been taken away. And for example, you hear periodically how one of the New York Times' most high-profile defense correspondents, Helene Cooper, is reporting from her car and filing stories from a sort of digital, from a dial-up in the front seat of her car behind the steering wheel, as if she has become a sort of homeless journalist. And so there's this literal crackdown and a physical crackdown that is debilitating journalism's effort to bring transparency to the Pentagon.
That transparency may not entirely be lost because all organisations can be pretty leaky.
Yes, they can. And I mean, we are seeing some pushback to this, to be clear. I mean, with this happening in the US, we are seeing, I'm very interested this week to see that there's been apparently, obviously we can't get numbers yet, but an enormous surge in searches for how do I cancel Disney Plus. So what you've seen is certainly some people power pushing back. And actually a number of big Disney Marvel stars have come out and said, you should cancel this. Do this. So that's been very, very interesting to watch, that people aren't completely taking this lying down. And I think, we will see that. We will see that there is going to be some kind of pushback, and there may well be legal challenges, of course, to this Pentagon ruling, which certainly seems to, if not directly contradict the First Amendment, certainly be on some territory where we're in a bit of a grey area. Technically, Congress hasn't made a law against it, but it's getting there, shall we say.
Congress hasn't made very many laws at all recently. This is all being done by executive order in the Oval Office. Sorry.
Exactly. So, it may not be against the letter of that law, but it's certainly against the spirit. That's very clear. And so, so I think there will be pushback, and, in the United States, and it's going to be very, interesting, horrifying to watch, I should say. But, certainly it is not going to end here.
And what's quite interesting is obviously Pete Hegseth was the author of his own great leak when a journalist was on a group chat when I think it was a Houthi rebels attack in Yemen, wasn't it, earlier on this year? So he'd have to sort of ban himself, wouldn't he, Charles?
This is one of the greatest sort of government-owned goals was, inadvertently inviting a journalist into a group chat, and moreover, a group chat that wasn't necessarily on a secure communications platform. So Pete Hegseth is going to have to learn to zip it. And since irony never dies, Pete Hegseth did work for a news organization prior to coming into the Pentagon, so you might think that he would know better.
What do we think about the sort of like the going forward? What this does for Pete Hegseth, as if anybody really cares anymore. Well, given the fact that he just the Pentagon, the White House just does what it wants to do now.
Well, quite. In normal times, I think that Signal group chat would absolutely have led to the resignation or very swift firing of any Secretary of Defence, as he then was called, now Secretary of War. This is not a normal government or a normal environment. So, who knows, all bets are off. I think he's repeatedly shown himself to be really quite slapdash and incompetent by regular standards. But as I say, if those don't apply, then, who knows?
That's all we have time for today's programme. The warmest of thanks to my guests, Alex von Tunzelmann and Charles Hecker here in the studio, Petri Burtsoff apple picking in Finland, and Tyler Brûlé enjoying a final dip in the Zürich Zee. The programme was produced by Desiree Banley and Mariella Bevan, and our studio engineer was Mariella Bevan as well. I'm Emma Nelson. Monocle on Sunday is back at the same time next week. Until then, goodbye. Thank you very much for listening and enjoy the rest of your weekend.